Okay, Golden Matters podcast, episode 1, our first ever. We have Peter Santaw here, and we're going to go ahead and jump right in and have him share with us about transitioning his background, basically, and then eventually transitioning into retirement, semi-retirement, retirement again. So, Peter, if you don't mind walking us through your background.
Sure, no problem. Peter Santaw here. So my background is I have 2 degrees. I have one in mechanical engineering and one in industrial design. My professional life started in 1975 at Hasbro Toys in Rhode Island. And for almost 50 years, my career has been in the toy and juvenile products industries. Other notable corporations have been Mattel, Fisher-Price, Jakks Pacific, McLaren Baby Products, and Kenner during the early Star Wars years. I have also been lucky to travel throughout the world, which I consider as a huge contribution to my education.
Amazing. Many a trips to Hong Kong, too, in that toy industry, right?
Yes, definitely. And with McLaren, I got to go to Europe several times, as well as Taiwan many times.
Wow, that's incredible. Did you go early on in your career overseas?
I never did. I was kind of lucky that my children mostly grew up before I started to travel. The companies I worked for had other people that did that back in the day. And later on, I got into companies that needed upper management to go over there as well as the people that did the actual work.
Wow. Would you say in your early parts of your career, did you feel like it was a 60-hour-a-week grind? What kind of position were you in?
Yes, well, as a product designer at the toy companies, it is a grind. You have to create the idea, and develop it, and then try and sell it to inside of the company. The best education there I received was at Fisher-Price, because we had our own model shop and we took our concepts and we built them in the model shop and then presented them rather than using outside people to create the models. We actually did it.
Well, that's probably changed quite a bit now, huh?
Yeah, significantly. They're all done in the Far East, from what I imagine now. Most of the product development companies that had been fairly large back in the certainly 70s, 80s, and 90s even are all gone. They're
Hey, Peter, Carrie mentioned the grind of 60 or 70 hours a week. In a typical year, how much vacation would you take?
2 weeks.
That's brutal. I'm guessing one was around the holidays. So there goes 1 week.
Exactly. Depends on the company you work for. Mattel, I only worked for them for about a year after they took over Tyco Toys, where I was working. And they were very generous with their time off, but they also had significant losses that year, financial losses. Therefore, a lot of us were out of work afterwards, although I jumped ship.
During that 2 weeks, if you're like a typical executive, how much work were you actually doing during that 2 weeks? Getting up in the morning, checking email, or would you completely log off during those 2 weeks?
I couldn't log off. My poor son is going through it now, and he has it even worse. He's a director of product development, and I basically told him, go into marketing. It's a lot easier. No,
Hey.
I said, you don't have to take, although you probably do anyway. I just look at it from my perspective in my little shell. But it's hard to turn it off. There are the lower level jobs, entry level. You can turn it off depending on your personality. But the higher up you go, the worse it is. And what I found was I wanted to know about everything and be involved in everything. So I went from product design to, handling design, the concept, to the development, to the engineering, to the manufacturing, and even in the marketplace. So I got involved with merchandising and packaging and displays and everything, because that way you could control the outcome. And you knew if it didn't make it, it was your fault, but you couldn't blame it on anyone else. But you pretty much had to see it through the whole life cycle to actually feel like you had some control.
That's a lot of intensity and self-induced, it sounds like at times.
Yeah, pretty much.
I don't think that's unique probably to you, unfortunately, especially in the US and probably other countries where we go above and beyond to provide ourselves more control, yet somehow also lose control in that.
Yeah, I know. There's only so much control you're going to get, and that's when you realize how much control you have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. Do you think as you were progressing, so what was kind of the trajectory of your career? Because I know when you and I worked together at Jax, you were pretty high up on design.
Yes. And my trajectory at Fisher Price, I took I'd been a manager at Kenner. Again, and during the Star Wars years in the late 70s, early 80s. But when I got to Fisher Price, I made the jump to management. They had two tracks there, management and professional. And I believe to get where I wanted to go, I needed to take the management track. Like I say, get involved with other things and trying to get some control. Because designers get very frustrated that their ideas don't get across and they lose control quite quickly. Uh, Lose control maybe later down the line.
I remember little things like it's to a designer because I was in marketing. Yes, I know. Go to a designer, and this is such a small example, but something like I intended that to be red for this particular reason that was extremely thoughtful from the designer's point of view. And what would happen is the marketer, whomever in sales, would go to the buyer side. So Target, Toys R Us, Walmart, whomever, and they would say, no, I want it to be blue with no thought really to it, certainly not to the extent of the designer. And it just so be it. It had to be blue.
Yeah, pretty much the buyer would say, I don't like red.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to be another color.
And that's that.
I love green, so it's got to be green. Like you say, no sense whatsoever to how that affects the child or the mother or the marketplace, but their personal preference took over. And I've certainly seen that many times.
Yeah. Do you think your stress levels, whether self-induced or not, in some cases, got progressively intense as you kept moving up?
Absolutely, absolutely. At Jack Pacific, I probably had the most responsibility, and I'm prone to migraines. And I had the worst migraines in my life working for Jack Pacific.
Oh yeah.
It's debilitating.
Oh my gosh, Peter. That's horrible. Well, you hit it well. Not that that's a good thing, but you still did a great job. Oh my goodness. Something we had been reading in a recent New York Times piece, it was from March, by, let me get her name right. Hopefully I say this right. Ohana Ravindranith. Hopefully I said that right. But it said the subject was what happens to your brain when you retire. And something that's interesting about what you've experienced is you were in this incredibly stressful position pre-retirement. And then all of a sudden you kind of go from 60 to 0 where you're pushing your pedal to the metal and all of a sudden you're at, a grinding halt, and how that feels and how that can cause symptoms of depression, and the link between the amount of intensity or even the amount of work you allowed yourself to participate in and how your identity was matched with your work, and how much greater that can affect the amount of depression you experience when it basically comes to a halt. Did you feel anything like that? Like, what's your reaction to those kinds of things?
In general, I don't get depression very easily. What I was able to do was transition from a really high level job to less and less and less levels of working still in the industry. Even though I would have a vice president job title, I would be working for a company that was a lot smaller and a lot more simple in their operations and their supply lines and things like that. So, and then going down all the way to startup companies that were very immature and very not so professional. But I kind of went downhill before I completely retired. And I still talk to a few friends and give them advice for free, but I still keep my toe in the water. But I was able to slow down rather than just a dead stop. So that I was lucky in that respect.
That's smart. That's one of the solutions that they talk about or that I've read about, that if you can plan ahead for such a halt, and by easing a transition, kind of exactly like you described, where you don't go from 60 to 0, you kind of slow down and then back in and slow down, or even plan new activities in the other parts of your life. So slowly you can grow those.
I definitely have done that. And I will say, I don't know about other people, but planning for me is like, I didn't know what you mean. Just kind of happened. Feeling in especially the toy industry is just when you think you figured it out, you have no idea what's going on. No idea. You look at companies. Take Bakugan as an idea from Spin Master. They were rolling so high. I went to factories in China, several factories where they made 90 million pieces of Bakugan in a year. Now, that was 2 factories, so 180 million pieces. And then what do you do next? What happens when Bakugan goes down? It's like, pull your hair out and whatever. Obviously, I did. But no, it's such a challenge for not just a company, but for an individual. The toy industry and probably other industries, it's just a roller coaster, so you don't know, and things never catch up.
Peter, would you say that when you finally did retire that you were burnt out from work, or was it just you were, set up financially where you could, step into retirement?
Companies are burnout on us. You hit 40, you start to look, look around. When you're 50, big companies are going to just dump you because your insurance is so high, and by then you've raised so high in the salary level that they'd have to make you president for you to get another raise. And there's only so many presidents. So certain ages, you're just done. Unless you're an owner of the company, if you're invested in the company, it's a different story. But I was burnt out, no doubt. I've had chances. I had friends tell me, well, why don't you just consult? And it's like, listen, consulting is just as bad as working at a toy company. But the big thing there is you're always worried about getting paid. I've had friends in the industry that were awesome consultants, and sometimes the big companies, it would take them 180 days to pay, and sometimes never paid. So big product development companies just went out of business, and I'm talking big retailers just.
Wow. I guess they're waiting on the terms to be fulfilled by retail, and then they take their sweet time to pay terms on your contract.
Maybe after they take their bonuses.
That too.
Black year, but
yeah. Oh, that's tough.
Once you felt that burnout, how long did it take you to actually feel like the pressure being lifted off your shoulders or head after you retired? Was it 3 months or 6 months or a year? Like, did you feel like one day where the pressure was gone from that burnout?
Good question. I have to say that it was in stages, again, because I was able to transition out of the career to lower and lower jobs. So it wasn't the complete decompression, but kind of a slow one. I don't know what it'd be like. Again, I always find something to do. It's just who I am. My father was a jack of all trades. He was a master of many trades. So I learned from him. And my grandparents, it's like the old Puritan ethic or whatever you want to say, the work ethic. You just find something to do and you do it. And I've been lucky that, I've been able to find those things after my complete retirement.
Glad you have. I keep reading this stat of over and over. It's a third of retirees feel some form of depression at some point. So I'm glad you're in the other 2/3 category. Not feeling that way. That's huge because that falls into all the subjects with, older population and aging. Depression leads to loneliness, can lead to even the muscles and your joint pain and cognitive decline and all of that.
I see it. One of my things I do now is I give tours down in Plymouth, Mass, for the Mayflower Society, and most of the people that I give tours to are in their 70s, 80s, 90s.
Wow.
You want to talk about your decline? It's right in front of me. So it's a wake up call.
Oh my goodness. Well, it's good timing then for us to ask you our question on walking us a mile in your shoes. So today you just mentioned you do volunteer work, which is incredible. I'm sure that falls in the category helping you find purpose and meaning in your retirement. So walk us a mile in your shoes. How is your day to day? Do you feel any particular challenges that we could put under the category of now because you're older?
Yeah. A mile in my shoes, probably maybe 4 days a week. I give tours down in Plymouth. I am a Mayflower descendant, Mayflower passenger descendant. 8 of my ancestors were on the Mayflower.
That's pretty neat.
So I've gotten involved with the Mayflower Society, thanks to my grandfather and my cousin for doing the research. But the way I give back to my ancestors is to give. I volunteer as a historian.
That's neat. This is almost a double purpose there because you're giving back and finding kind of new purpose in the now.
It works. So I get into it. I love history, and I would have done that if I could have figured out how to make more money. I did in the toy industry. But early on, I decided history is not going to make me enough money to live. And at least that was my understanding back then. So I went into engineering and design. But yeah, so I continue to do research to find out more about my ancestors. And now there are 10 million of us in the United States that are descendants of Mayflower passengers. A lot of people don't realize that. They go 4 or 5 generations back and go, well, I'm not connected to the Mayflower. Once you go 10 or 12 generations back, that's when you're going to find, because like I said, there's 10 million here in the United States, and there's 35 million throughout the world. So you've got a pretty decent shot of being a Mayflower descendant. So I want to know about my ancestors and why I'm here and why we're here. That's the Mayflower Compact was the beginning of the U.S. Constitution. So back in 1620. So it's significant contribution to our government and our beginning of the country. But they run the gamut. So I have an ancestor that was in a fist fight and basically thrown in the stocks for a while. He was an indentured servant, and then I go all the way up to William Brewster, who was their spiritual leader here in the colony. We had no ordained minister here till 1629. From 1620 to 1629, William Brewster was the spiritual leader as well as the head elder of the colony. So I span the whole range of people on board the Mayflower. I want to stop talking about that. I'll be up all day on that. But I also keep up trying to keep my brain active. That's what helps keep my brain active. I read about what has gone on, and there's new books are being written every day. Surprisingly, you think, well, that's over and done with. But no, people are doing research nowadays that will blow your mind about back then, things that we never knew about before, and they're just discovering now. But also, I find that, staying fit and keeping your mind active are two of the main things that you need to do. Keeping my mind fit, not only do I do the Mayflower and the reading there, I watch documentaries on Netflix about history, but also, where am I going here?
Just things you enjoy, things you're doing.
Yeah, my wife and I watched Jeopardy, and I believe that was a show that was made. So we have that. And it's when we talk challenges, being a parent and a grandparent, and a parent, which you are now, Carrie. Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you.
Believe me, I'm 76 and it never ends. You're a parent. And then if you have grandchildren, you're a grandparent, and that it never ends. So that you can't just check that box off and walk away. And I tend to put things in boxes, which help me because I can't be consumed by issues. I want to deal with issues, but I deal with many issues a day. Just like, I learned that working, that, there's 100 things that you have to get done today, and you can't worry about just one thing all day long, because the other 99 are going to just mount up. So you have to be able to put things in boxes and come back to them when they're absolutely necessary.
That's a good thought, because I think it can be even at any age, but particularly I observe this with folks a little older. You kind of can get stuck on it all day. Almost like recently I was helping my mom with some Medicare stuff, and it took about 4 hours to get it done, but the amount of thinking time about this one task was arduous and exhausting. And that really was the activity of the day. And so it's very easy to get trapped, I think, in this one thing. Or if you're in pain, for example, and you're kind of like, well, that's it. That's my day. I hurt. And I can't blame someone for that, because that's a horrible position to be in. But I think expanding your potential in the day is probably really helpful.
Yeah, I try to stay creative, keep my finger in drawing and painting and sculpture, things like that. I think everybody should have a creative outlet, whatever that is, because it's spiritual as far as that goes. And also gardening, it was Joni Mitchell put in the song for Woodstock, get back to the land and set your soul.
Listen, your gardening is beautiful. I see your pictures. They are gorgeous, Corey. You should see it. It's like professional landscape.
I enjoy that. It gets my mind off of issues. It is creative. And when you're done, you're done. A lot of professional jobs, as you well know, there's no ending to things. You don't feel like you've accomplished things because you can. And that's one thing I always liked about design. When you were done, you could see the product on the shelf. Yeah. And there are a lot of jobs that don't have that, but it's true with gardening. I find that, seeing the finished product, is rewarding. Even in California, I did my own yard work, but I used to like to mow the lawn and everything because it got my mind off of the day-to-day junk.
Yeah. It's interesting too, you talk about being creative because I had been reading about creativity is something that you can practice and train. Like,
Absolutely. Well, you could learn to sing, and maybe you're not going to be Adele or something, but there are levels that you can reach beyond where you are now. And from my understanding and what I've noticed is that your ability for creativity starts where you ended it. If you stop drawing when you were 5 and you're 50, your drawing's going to be 5 years old until you take the next step. So if you keep drawing, you'll continually progress.
so I never really thought of that before. Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah, it seems like you've really been able to reinvent yourself in your next chapter in life. If somebody were struggling with retirement and did have some of that depression that Carrie was talking about earlier, what type of advice would you give them outside of, some of the creative stuff that you've mentioned here? Do you feel like other people have a hard time finding that new normal?
Absolutely. But I would look into volunteering because I think that when you can help other people with their issues, it tends to help you with yours. It gives you a sense of purpose and kind of a sense of achievement when you can help other people. And it's usually something that you're going through or have been through that you can help them with. So that's someplace for me that I would suggest to go.
Yeah. That's neat too, because before you had talked about when you're doing your volunteering, you're in person with people. There's some research on it's great to, let's say, be interested in movies and books, but there's a huge difference in helping with that depression part of actual socializing. So, joining a book club. So, read the book, but then go join human beings in action and be with them and communicate in person. There's a huge difference in that aspect, which it sounds like you're doing a lot of.
Yeah, actually, the Mayflower Society has a book club. So the latest book is on Jamestown. So I also have an ancestor in Hopkins that was in Jamestown in 1610.
Wow.
His adventures in Bermuda were the basis for the Tempest that Shakespeare wrote. But so that's what we're gonna be talking about Jamestown in a couple of weeks. That down in Plymouth, we hold the Mayflower Society book club down there. Yeah, I get to talk to a lot of people. We have tours that come in. I've had 29 women from the Colonial Dames Society that I gave a tour to down there. But I've given tours up to 45 people, which makes interesting tour. And I've given a tour to 11 deaf ministries. That was a challenge.
I assume they had someone to.
They did have a translator. One day I was doing a tour at the Mayflower Meeting House, which is the latest version of the meeting house that was started back in 1620. The bus pulled up and 45 people got out, and a lady said, I had the tour last year and I told you I had a tourist group, and here they are. So,
Oh my
okay,
gosh.
I wasn't expecting them. It's kind of like herding kittens at some point.
Do you observe anything in the groups? Because you mentioned they were quite a bit older, a majority. Do you observe any, like, what kinds of things are you observing that look like they could be challenges as simple as going on a tour? What is that like for some of these folks? And what do you picture their day like preparing just to come and tour?
Yeah, it's physical and mental. You can see that some people just have no idea what they're listening to, even when you're telling them, or are so surprised that the initial shock they never get over. They still have it at the end of the tour, like, oh my God. But I notice a lot of physical problems. And I'm 76. I'll soon be 77. So I'm right up there with them. But I'm thankful that I'm not in the physical condition that they are in. You can tell in some respects, they do it to themselves. I meet once a month with my high school class, believe it or not.
Wow.
There's probably eight or 10 of us that still get together once a month. I mean, I can see with them, some of them have never left. They went to Vietnam, but they never left their hometown. But they like beer too much and things like that. It's like you can't do that to yourself. The older you get, the worse it gets. So you have to be more and more diligent the older you get about your physical fitness, or else it can get bad. So people can't go up the stairs, they have to sit down during a tour, things like that.
Yeah, that can be a long time. I imagine I always picture people even just waking up in their day. And when I go to the gym, when I see the older folks there, because they do the older fitness classes, which is great. And I look at them and I'm just in awe because I think for them to get there that day required so much more than for me to get there. And the fact that they're there doing any sort of fitness level is pretty incredible. And so that always goes through my mind is kind of how much longer did they have to take to get here today, mentally and physically?
It's true, and I try and do more and more of my own. Like I like to be outdoors. I don't like to be inside a gym, and I have a short. I have good temper, I guess. So when people are sitting on, when I want to.
You're that guy.
And I want. I'm not there. I'm not there to socialize. And if you want to socialize, that's fine. Just get off the machine.
Yeah.
Because other people want to use it. So I'm doing more and more on my own because of that. But I like the fresh air better too. There's a couple of months here that are a little arduous in the winter where I really go to the gym, go outside.
Yeah. I think you have a good balance with the way you're getting community elsewhere. So it does make sense too that the gym might not be your spot for community. Whereas for others, it makes sense that could be their spot where it's easier to meet folks. I am always really interested in the different types of communities that form for all types of people, stay-at-home parents. And Corey and I were talking about before veterans, coming home and reintegrating back into life. And what is that like? And how do you find that community?
That's horrible. That's horrible. Yeah.
Yeah.
I know. I was lucky. I had a student deferment throughout Vietnam because I was in engineering school. So they wanted engineers to stay in college. And I was in the draft the last year I was there, but that's during the lottery, and I knew I was pretty far down on the list. But I had friends that I worked with that are just so shell shocked, I guess is the old term. Post traumatic shock is the new one, and they're like, what, really bad. I have friends now that they're basket cases that because of Vietnam, and they're.
Can't even imagine. I know it's a little off topic, but you just made me think. There's two parts to that that kind of hit me. And one is even to think about what it must have been like essentially sitting there waiting and waiting for your fate in a way. That must have been terrifying.
It was this constant stress that did it to a lot of people because while you're waiting, you're being shot at, and you're out on patrol and it's at night and it's raining out and you can't, basically because of the creatures that are out there in the jungle, other than the two-legged kind, you can't really sit down. So you have to fall asleep up against a tree with your parka on and the rain on you and the humidity making you sweat inside that. You can only take cat naps, but you're on night patrol and you have to be out at night. I mean, it's the stories. I mean, I'm lucky I was never there, but it just, it's horrific. And then we don't take care of the veterans when they get home either, which is really the worst.
That's a big topic for sure. A really sad one and a very real one. Is there anything I wanted to ask you from your observations or even in your own life? Is there any one thing or two things that stick out where you're kind of like, oh, wasn't expecting that when I got older? It could be anything.
It's a good question. I hadn't really thought about it. It's the way that I think the way that the government hasn't really prepared themselves for the demographics that we're under, that more and more people are getting older and living because of our healthcare system, and so many fewer younger people are actually able to contribute financially to the healthcare system. Nobody really thought about that. And I guess it's the short-sightedness of government to really understand and take care of what the people need. We're looking at, artificial intelligence now. The government's not prepared for artificial intelligence. No idea what's going to happen. And neither do I. I've got an idea of what's going to happen, but it will shape our lives completely different. And the people that it will put out of work and the people that will be able to take up the slack technology-wise in the near future, we're not prepared for that. The kids aren't learning that, not enough of them in high school and college. And what's the system? There just isn't a system that's going to take care of people that need help and that really aren't able to really create a living wage for themselves.
I was thinking about that before this podcast today. Peter, I looked up some statistics and it says the average retirement income in the US from Social Security or some sort of pension is $27,000 a year. So you start thinking about when we were talking about depression, not only does somebody kind of lose their identity and who they were in their professional life, but their income could have dropped 50% or something like that, and they're struggling to be able to pay their bills. So, do you hear that? You mentioned going back and meeting with your high school class once a month. Do you hear that from some of the conversations you're having?
Well, some of the people who were my comrades or whatever, are still working. It's 77, 78 years
Wow.
old because of that, doing the best they can. Others are, if it wasn't for Social Security and Medicare, I don't know what they'd do. Actually, I don't know what I'd do. I mean, you see your health going away, and then when you're on a limited income, it's pretty brutal. I mean, I didn't retire officially till I was 70, so my Social Security is pretty high. But, my wife retired fairly early, so kind of balance each other out a little bit there. Social Security, and when you hear politicians start to talk about Social Security and Medicare, you're ready to take a trip to DC.
Mm-hmm.
But and there's not enough of that that goes on. I think there's a lot of other care that should happen. If you look at housing, especially when you're older, because of fixed incomes and your health and everything, I think that there should be more communal living. Everybody's trying to live in their own house that they've grown up with or that they've had for many years, but it's not really practical. The taxes keep going up when your income doesn't, and you've continually have that kind of monkey on your back, or something that you're looking at on a day-to-day basis. And if we had better and more communal living where people of similar ages could live closer together, and therefore you could amplify the care that they would get, health care and other things. And my cousin just passed away in Maine at 78, and his wife has got this huge yard to mow and take care of, and it was fine when they had kids and this, that, and the other thing. Now I'm downsized with my property, but then it gets to a point where you say, I don't want to get any smaller in my footprint of life, but I need somebody to take care of me. And rather than have a lot of other people that you don't know taking care of you, if you were in the elder care commute, that you would take care of yourself. Now, there are a lot of them out there, but they cost money, and
That's
it's like
the thing.
it's not really. That's not really what you want. You want something that you can live off of, with your fixed income, and still be taken care of, and still feel like you're in the community with caring adults.
Now, there's a whole mental aspect to that too, right? Many folks, at least, from my experience and speaking with many people, it can almost feel like it's the last step before the end. So it's hard, I think, for people to move out of their single home, even if the maintenance around them is mayhem. No one's saying that to you, but it's always implied almost.
It is. It's always, it's kind of like in the back of your mind. I want to just throw in one thing.
Yeah.
That I've observed in life, and it's diversity, because we see a lot of people putting a squash on that recently. But if we look back to Jack's Pacific, where we both worked, my product design and development group there was the most diverse group of people I have ever worked with. Anyone and everyone you can think of from all over their ethnic backgrounds and where they came from were everywhere, and all different kinds of educations. We had fashion illustrators, we had product designers, we had illustrators and whatever, not specific product designers like I would normally expect, but we had such a fantastic melting pot of ideas that we came up with some really great product.
Remember, now that you're saying that, I'm picturing the people, and it's so true. I never thought about that. That is probably the most diverse group I'd ever been.
Yeah, yeah, we had just about every Asian country you could think of, and we had people from the Eastern Bloc, and black and white, and Jewish and Buddhist, and Protestant, Catholic, you name it. We had it all, but it worked great because it was such a melting pot right there. Another 20 something people that we came up with some great ideas.
It's actually an interesting thought, just to come back a little bit to what you were saying about having these communities where folks live together and they can help each other out essentially. And then add this layer of diversity onto that, just the diversity in thought, but culturally too, going into that kind of community. I wonder if there's the even exponential benefit to that community for the older generation just by diversifying who's there. I have to ask you a couple of things. One is going back to retirement time frame. I think that you probably did a darn good job of transitioning, thankfully. Is there anything that if you went back in time that you would adjust about the way you transitioned to retirement from corporate life?
Pay more attention to finances and investments. I kind of just put in my 401k and never thought that much about it. It's such a confusing um, issue, and it's intentionally confusing. So you have to go to professionals for it. So, but watching and trying to absorb as much as I can about what goes on with finances. And I've made adjustments over the past several years. I just wish I did that earlier. I was lucky I got into Northwestern Mutual Life Insurance way back in the day. So that was, believe it or not, that was probably the best investment I made, surprisingly.
Well, I'm glad you had that. Yeah, that's true, though. I
Yeah.
bet if you did a poll with folks, almost all of them would be set it and forget it in retirement accounts because it is confusing. And then, God forbid, you change jobs. Now you're rolling it into another plan that may not have the same opportunities. Now you get to learn that. So it's confusing. And if it's supposed to be a retirement, it's not funny, but it's a little funny because then you think that's my big plan for when I'm done here and I don't even understand it.
And what kills you is the way that the 401k especially was supposed to be rolled out. You were never going to be taxed on it, that was the original proposal. And now you're forced, once you're 70 years old, you have to, 72 now, I'm not sure what it is, you have to take required yearly disbursements out of your 401k. You should be able to just let that sit there. You shouldn't have to take it out if you don't need it, and you shouldn't be taxed on it once it comes out. I mean, it's ridiculous. So many things we do in this country, you pay tax upon tax upon tax.
Yeah, the doubles. Yeah, I'm not a fan.
Social Security shouldn't be taxed either. I'm in Massachusetts and I have to pay an income tax on Social Security. Like, it's ridiculous.
Yeah, that one's bad. I got a few choice words about that one myself. Oh, goodness. Well, this has been really interesting. I have one more favor to ask of you, and that is to join our story time. And if there's anything in your whole lifespan, from even childhood all the way to now, something doesn't have to be about retirement or anything like that, just from your own life and something about you, just something meaningful, a story, it's humorous, unique, or special, anything.
Well, I was saving the jacks for that, but I sprung it too early. But, I will throw out my example of my grandfather, who was did the original research on our Mayflower ancestors, and he was such a resilient person. He passed away in his 80s, but one of his neighbors told my cousin that he would be up on the roof, fixing the roof at 80 years old. And I'm thinking, I'm 70, almost 77. I'm not getting up
No
on
way.
that roof for anything.
Yeah.
But he was a gardener, had a huge garden, but he walked all the way from Deer Isle, Maine, from where he came from, all the way to Portland, which probably took him 3 days. Looking for work, he walked all the way down looking for work.
Wow.
He started out or early on in his life. He got into he was in the First World War, but only far enough to get shipped to Europe. But the whole ship, because they had the measles, so they were quarantined before they could get in the war, and then the war was over.
Oh.
So he went through everything, even shipped over there just to come back later. Throughout his career, he made those changes that I could see when we're talking about being resilient. He was a watchmaker for quite a while, which takes a lot of physical dexterity. People don't know that back then you didn't go and buy a Timex watch that was already put together. If you wanted a watch, then they would take, things from here, things from there, different pieces, and actually put them together to create the watch from components. So he did that, and you can imagine the little screwdrivers and everything. But then he contracted giantism later on, and his fingers became so big He couldn't do it anymore. So he worked for American Can, the canning company up in Portland, Maine. So they canned a lot of things, baked beans and sardines of all kinds, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So he made a major training. He worked there 40 years. He made tremendous efforts throughout his life, to get where he did.
Wow. And to think that I always think about things like, had he not turned around on the ship or gotten basically dismissed, what then becomes of you and everyone
Sure.
else? That's tough. Multiply that times thousands of people's experiences.
Yeah, one of my father's uncles was killed in the Argonne in World War War.
Oh my God. You just never know. We don't know any different, but it's interesting to think about. Wow. Peter, thank you so much for being here, for all your time and your stories and your background and sharing with us. I'm very glad you're part of that 66% that are not experiencing depression in retirement, but it's nice to hear your experiences.
Yeah, thanks for sharing your story. And if I'm ever in the neck of the woods of the Mayflower, I know where to.
Anytime when you're up here, if ever interested, I'm here.
We know where to find you. Great. Well, take care. Thank you so much. Hello, Carrie and Corey back in the studio, here to react to yesterday's guest and topic on retirement with Peter Santaw. So what did you think, Corey?
I thought it was good. The things that stood out to me is he talked about having of classmates that he went to high school with that gets together on a monthly basis.
Yeah.
And I'd love to be on a fly on the wall and hearing those conversations because outside of the weather and the medications around, I'm sure there's a lot of conversations around, will I outlive my finances, healthcare and mobility,
Yeah.
and having a purpose. And so I think it really, points to the crux of the podcast.
Yeah, I agree. It was interesting too. Just this morning, I was at Lifetime Fitness. They have a really cool coffee group called Aurora. And there was probably maybe 20 or so, but you could tell at the beginning, because I was new, that it's a surface level, which is nothing wrong with that. It's normal. But very quickly, the conversation turned into financial in this case, and even somewhat on the purpose topic. But it was interesting. I did ask some people about retirement and what that felt like. And many of them kind of delved into what Peter did with how he didn't really understand his own 401k, which many people don't. Like, what's in there and you just set it and forget it. And one gal even had where when she finally retired, she had never realized that without managing it, it didn't really work in her favor. So
Yeah.
I thought that was kind of interesting that conversation happened today when we were just talking about it yesterday.
Yeah, I went to a couple workshops this week. One was on Social Security and one was on taxes and retirement. And the thing that really stood out to me is once you get to be 65 or 70, your total wealth probably isn't going to change much at that time. And this generation really just focuses each week on how do I save money, whether it comes from groceries or repairs or whatever. Really, what they talked about in this workshop is how the goal is to get to the end of the year and have zero taxes, and how the decisions you make at the beginning of the year can affect significantly on how much tax you have to pay at the end of the year. Because people pay taxes on Social Security benefits, they pay taxes on 401k withdrawals, other income that you might have. Really what I learned out of that is the amount that you may withdraw just by $1,000 or $2,000 could impact the amount of taxes you pay from 0 to maybe 20 or 30% in taxes. Yeah, it was very interesting to really delve more into Social Security and taxes and retirement.
What was kind of the demographic in the room?
It was all over the place. You could tell there were people in their upper 70s that were just trying to learn the new codes. The person that kind of taught the class said that taxes and retirement are really in pencil because they change really every 4 years based upon who's in office and who's running the Senate. There's always changes that affect certain areas up or down. But there are also people like myself that were in their mid 50s that were just trying to prepare on what the future looks like and how can I make some changes from here, over the next 10 or 15 years before you retire.
Yeah. I'm always curious if there's hope in that. So if someone's already retired now, it feels like a lot of them perhaps focus on a lot of these like retirement forums and sessions and webinars even are like how to prepare for retirement, which is great. We all need that. And I think there's a whole new podcast just for that. But if you're retired now and you're kind of like, crap, I didn't realize these things. And is there hope that there's something they can do? Is that touched on?
Yeah, I just think there's a lot of misperceptions around what is Social Security, how much am I going to be paid? Because you can log into the Social Security website, which is much different than you could, 10 or 15 years ago. You
Yeah.
can log in right now. It'll tell you if you retired, if you didn't make any more money from today on, what your retirement benefits would be if you retire at 62 or 65 or 67, and it'll show you the difference in it. So
Oh,
just knowing how much you're going to have at that time, understanding tax implications, like if I sell my house and, with the housing prices going up, everybody looks at that as a huge positive, which it is. But if you bought a house for 150,000 and it's worth 500,000 now, what that capital gains will look like, not only from a federal standpoint, but in your particular state. So I thought those things were really interesting just to know what you should have on your radar and what you could plan. The number one thing that they said is everybody has a tax prepper. On an annual basis, everybody knows in April you got to do your taxes. But really what they talked about is making sure that in September, October, every year that you're preparing for the following year on taxes on things, because the goal is to get to the end of the year and pay zero taxes when you're in
yeah.
retirement. And what that looks like and just the little tweaks that you can do to make sure that you can win each year when you do that.
Interesting. Corey and I were talking about this, gosh, even before yesterday's podcast. And so I jumped into some research on it. And what was interesting to me is that the phrase financial planner was not a federally regulated term. So the key word to look for is the fiduciary, because they are legally obligated to do right by their client. And so they actually have, I'm going to read this from my phone, but they have several resources, legitimate resources and organizations to look up actual fiduciaries. And we'll post these on our website and in the show notes, but it's NAPFA, the CFP board, Garrett Planning Network. So all of those can help you search for actual fiduciaries. And then there's another interesting one, a couple of search tools that you can use by zip code to find out how to find a fiduciary near you and their exact fees. And one of them is smartasset.com and the other was feeonlynetwork.com. And then lastly, there was a place, if that's not enough for you to give it credence, there's another one where you can verify credentials, and that's through FINRA's broker check system. So once you say to them and you do all your due diligence and you're like, yep, are you certified? Are you this? Are you that? And I say, yep. You can further then also check, is what you're saying true, and check on their credentials. It's nice to have tools to look for that and start somewhere, because I picture people who are just like, well, I don't know. Who the heck do I talk to? So
But I
at
think
least
those are some of the conversations that you can have in your Silver Sneakers type programs or Aurora, or when you get together with your friends. From my experience talking to my parents and my in-laws and other people that are in the baby boomer and silent generation, a lot of people don't have financial planning or estate planning or even a will because of a trust factor. So, word of mouth is the best thing that I think that you can come up with. Like, who have you worked with that you really trust? It's the same reason you buy insurance in a local level. Like, who do you buy your car insurance from? Normally you get those not from research online, because let's be honest, a lot of baby boomers and silent generation aren't doing a lot of research online. It's
yeah.
just word of mouth. So I think that just understanding that tax planning, financial planning, those sorts of things really are really good from word of mouth, because if somebody's had a really good experience with them or somebody's been taken, that's where you're going to learn best practices.
Yeah. I wonder too if you could ask, so like you said, if everyone pretty much always has to work with an accountant or a CPA for their taxes, I think perhaps then a good suggestion could be ask them. Who do you trust that's can help me on the planning side? That could be, if
Yeah,
you're already trusting them, maybe they're a great referral source.
that's interesting, because as I was sitting through these workshops, I've had a financial guy for years. Obviously, everybody has to do their taxes every year, but I've really never worked with anybody that says, okay, towards the end of the year, we need to do tax planning for next year on how to maximize, because it's not just your income. Really, especially in the retirement days, you have to look at mandatory withdrawals from like 401k or IRAs, but also in any investments that you have, there's going to be capital gains and distributions that it's hard to project each year what you're going to have from that. So
Yeah.
working with a financial person to say, listen, my goal is to end the end of the year with zero taxes. How do we get there?
Yeah.
Especially if you have a major life event coming up, like you're going to sell the house that you live in or an investment property or something like that. You don't think about the capital gains that you've experienced over, a life. Maybe you're selling the house that you raised all your children in, how that's going to affect your Social Security benefits.
Yeah, that's great advice. It's funny. You made me think of, I'm going to now, if I were listening to this, I would say, okay, I'm motivated. I'm going to go talk to my CPA or a friend, whomever, and say, find me who's somebody that you trust who's a fiduciary. And I'm going to go ask them. The first thing I'm going to say to them is, first of all, assuming there's trust, I'm going to say, my end in mind is zero taxes or as close to that as possible. I need you to get me there, and then work backwards. That could be kind of a neat approach instead
For
of
real.
like, how do you even start that conversation? So then put it on them.
Yeah. I mean, it really is a strategy every year, because every year when you're in retirement, something's going to be different. You may sell a house. There may be an IRA that's coming up that you have a mandatory withdrawal each year, and your income could swing from, maybe $50 to $100,000 that year. So how do I make sure that at the end of the year, just a couple $1,000s one way or another can throw you in a different tax bracket, which might be the difference between paying 5% in taxes or 50% in taxes.
Yeah, that's crazy. I only somewhat recently realized that you could get Social Security still and work and get
Yeah,
and also have another, I should say, have another income source, not necessarily work. So it's interesting that component could affect the Social Security part, and you have to think about it. Where are the income streams, and how can that affect the one
yeah,
that you're come more the fixed income side?
yeah. And some of the other things so I'm going to go to estate planning this evening, which I think is going to be really interesting as well, like how to make future plans for some of the things that we talked about here. So we can talk about that next week on just some of the things that I learned in that estate planning.
Yeah, that'll be great. We'll look forward to that.
I think one of the things that we need to talk about a little bit more is, retirement, but also when we talk about having a purpose, that really goes to identity. And you and I have talked about this many times. I think you go through different phases in your career on, when you're in high school, you identify as one thing, and then you're trying to look for your identity when you're in college, and then you get your professional career, and that kind of positions your identity. Then you start having children, maybe not in that order, but you start, do I identify with my role in life right now? And I think identity goes along with either what your career is or maybe the activities you're involved in.
Yeah.
You talked a lot about in an article you read recently about depression. And I think depression goes hand in hand on, do I currently have a purpose, and what's my identity, and what activities I'm involved with. And as you go to the other two things that we're really focused on with Golden Matters is, will I outlive my money or my finances and healthcare? If your healthcare isn't in check and you don't have good mobility, well, that affects, kind of your identity and the activities that you can be involved in. So
Yeah.
how do you think about that from a depression standpoint? Because depression is real in each stage of your career, especially when you transition into retirement, trying to figure out how you're going to fulfill your life on a daily basis from a purpose perspective.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. I think identity and differentiating identity from activity is important too. They go hand in hand, but one is kind of almost saying, what is my value in this world? And one is saying, what do I do with my day? And
Yeah.
they certainly overlap and affect each other, but they're different.
I mean, I think there's things that we all look forward to things that when we look forward to vacations or a different hobby or something. Those are things that you can look forward to that really raise your spirits. From my perspective, I'm a hack runner. I try to do 3 or 4 half marathons a year. I'm not an elite runner, but if I have an injury that, I'm training for a while and then all of a sudden I can't run, that changes my perception, and that changes how I feel about myself in that particular time. I can't imagine if somebody is 65, 70 years old and has a life altering event like a heart attack or a stroke, and it cuts out some of the activities they've been able to do that really brings them joy in life, how that depression can really set in.
Yeah, it's creating both the identity and activity factor again. And then even the way you interact with, let's say you have grandchildren, now your interaction has changed with them. You can't run around as much. You might feel like you can't do some of the activities you were doing before.
Or even traveling to get there. Maybe now you can't travel 10 hours or 8 hours or wherever your grandchildren are because of your healthcare and mobility. And that's what, that how that lack of interaction with your family affects your psyche as well.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah, depression is very real, especially for this population. So I think it's probably an undertone of every topic of the three we talk about. If you're uneasy about your finances, that can lead to depression. If your health is up, down, or diminishing, that can affect that. Cognitive decline, all of that's super real. And then purpose. If you feel like you bring no value to the world anymore, that's not a very good feeling,
No.
and can kind of down a rabbit hole.
From my experience, the silent generation doesn't use technology much. And what I mean by that is laptops and iPhones and things like that. But baby boomers, we're talking about age 61 to 79. My parents are in their mid 70s and they both have an iPhone.
Yeah.
And I think that as technology evolves and if mobility keeps them from seeing their family, you can start using technology like FaceTime and things like that will make them feel connected. So,
I think so too.
those are things I would encourage people in, the baby boomers to help share their knowledge of FaceTime and technology to connect their friends and family with their loved ones.
That's smart. Now you're making me want to go look for a nonprofit that works to help silent generation with technology, specifically for like FaceTimes, things like
Yeah,
that.
I don't know what it is. My in-laws are in their 80s and 90s, and they don't have a laptop or Wi-Fi or smartphones or anything like that. But my parents are maybe 5 to 7 years younger than my mother-in-law, and my parents were not tech savvy at all growing up. We didn't even have cable in the house. But they both have iPhones now, and I think if you're in that 61 to 79 age range, technology isn't an issue. Most people have a computer. Maybe you're doing your online banking with it and things like that. I just don't see it much from the silent generation. I would love to be proven wrong, but it doesn't seem like anybody that's past 80 years old is really doing a lot of
No.
online banking
It's
or
a problem. A whole other topic one day is the digital divide is what it's referred to in digital health space. And
uh,
it's very real because as all these new technologies come out and all these new health apps come out, they're phenomenal. But now you're talking to the people that perhaps need those things the most in certain cases, like let's say it's AFib or AFib detection.
oh yeah.
They want and need that resource, but the tech might be too complex. So now they're almost, in a sense, almost aged out of using this technology that should be helping them the most. So it's a whole other topic of tech being accessible for those generations, let alone how that tech integrates with their current care coordination.
You and I were talking about this off camera from a finance perspective. When I started my professional career, you would put something in a 401k and it would just sit there. You didn't really move your money around very often. And it was just kind of set it
Uh,
and forget it. But with technology evolving as much as it is, you can look at your 401k every day or every month or every quarter and look at how that's changing. So if you're invested in a wrong area, you can quickly change that. So technology is moving forward. It's not all for the good, but I do think from a finance perspective, that's definitely an advantage and something that our Golden Matters community should really take advantage of
yeah.
being able to track that online.
That's smart. And maybe with those caregivers and supporters we talk about too, they can be the ones to help,
Yeah.
do that with, I'm sure, like we do with our parents.
One of the things I want to talk about in the future, I mentioned that I'm a healthcare executive. I worked in a lot of different areas. I worked in respiratory, I worked in mobility, which means like wheelchairs, bath safety, rollators, things like that. I've also worked on other DME projects. I've worked in healthcare as far as surgical device. I've been in urology, GYN, bariatrics, surgeries that people need to have as they get older as well. But I think we can touch on some best practices that people don't know about from a
Mm,
mobility perspective. There
yeah.
are ways that you can get on an airplane today, if even if you have compromised oxygen function, that you can get on a plane and travel with
Wow.
little to no, distraction.
Yeah.
Um, so I
Make
think
the
those
world.
are some of the things that we can really focus on in the future, on how to make travel and mobility something that is palatable, even if you've had some sort of life altering event when it comes to healthcare.
And boy, does that open the world up. There's now ways and means to be able to travel, especially, and
Yeah.
even go see family. Coming back to the
Yeah.
social part, see that baby in person.
And from a depression standpoint, there's been tons and tons of research done. If you just get out and walk, it doesn't matter if it's for a block or a mile or whatever it is, the amount of dopamine that hits your brain when you do that is life altering. So one of the things that we want to do here at Golden Matters is really to create a community around living your best life, making sure that you can mitigate those depressive thoughts as you go through health situations. So we're going to focus on things like mobility and exercise. We've even kicked around the idea of having instead of 5Ks, something like a 3K, like a 2 mile walk may be the max that anybody can do out there. But
Yeah.
if we can get out and do a mile or 2 miles a day, that may mean the difference between somebody's outlook for the entire week.
Yeah. Yeah. Even try once a week just to start. Try
So
around to your mailbox to start.
for
Just
real.
little steps. Yeah.
So, Golden Matters actually has a couple different meanings when it comes to the name, but we talked about having an area in the podcast, and you saw it with Peter, walk a mile in my shoes. That has a couple different meanings as well. I want to hear what a mile in Peter's shoes is like throughout the week, but I also want to hear some of these people that have had phenomenal careers and lives and legacies on how they've been able to adapt what a mile in their shoes looks like throughout their career.
Yeah. I love that. It's a good way to look at it. And I know you just touched on it, that word legacy. That'll be a fun one to get into as we have more guests and really understand where is their thought on their own legacy.
It's funny, in these workshops I went to, there were 5 different things that they really focus on. One was income, another one was taxes, but the last one was legacy. So
Hmm.
when this guy talked about planning for the future, it wasn't about it was what the legacy of that person wanted to be. Sometimes it would be transferring assets to their children. Sometimes it's just accomplishing like things on their bucket list. So I think everybody, and my wife and I have actually started talking about like what's your legacy? What is it that you want to be known for when you're not here anymore? So I do think that that's an important topic for us to bring up here, because maybe it's sharing best practices around legacy, but it might just be bringing up legacy is important to a person that's 65, 70, 80, 85 years old. What should and could your legacy be when you're not here? Because it's maybe the first time they've ever thought about it.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I've never thought about it. I know I'm not quite there yet, but you typically just kind of barrel through your day and week, and months turn into years, and all of a sudden you're probably hit retirement and you think, what did I want out of life? So
Yeah.
that's a good question.
Until next week, I think we've got everything accomplished for Golden Matters for this week, a forum for the aging population, and we encourage you to subscribe to our channel, and we'll see you next week.